At a suburban Starbucks in Orange County, California, things were just as they always were. Casual, quiet, and full of the soft hum of laptops and lattes. The regulars were there, chatting or typing away, until the door opened and in walked Mr. Dalton, a retired Army sergeant, wearing his veteran's cap and carrying a slow, proud stride. He ordered his usual, a black coffee, no frills, and sat down at his usual corner table. Everyone knew Mr. Dalton. He was polite, quiet, and had a smile for anyone who greeted him. Then came HOA. She was well-dressed, loud, and clearly irritated about something. Maybe the long line, maybe the wrong drink. She saw Mr. Dalton's cap, scoffed, and muttered just loud enough for others to hear, "Ugh." Another one of those heroes looking for attention. A hush fell over the room. No one spoke. Mr. Dalton didn't even turn his head. But then, something happened. Something no one expected. Mr. Dalton slowly stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't glare. He simply turned toward HOA, adjusted the cap on his head, the one with the worn-out Vietnam campaign ribbon, and said in a calm, gravelly voice, "Ma'am, I didn't fight so people could respect me. I fought so people like you had the right not to." The entire cafe fell silent. One barista nearly dropped the milk jug she was steaming. A young man at a nearby table stopped typing mid-sentence, his jaw half open. HOA blinked, surprised. She hadn't expected a response, certainly not one so steady. Her smirk faltered. But Mr. Dalton wasn't finished. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded photo. He walked up to her table and gently placed it down. It was an old, weather-worn picture. For young men in uniform, smiling in front of a dusty outpost. One of them was unmistakably Mr. Dalton, 30 pounds lighter and 50 years younger. "Only 2 of us came home," he said, his voice quieter now, eyes not accusing but tired. "We were 19. We weren't heroes. We were just kids doing what we thought was right." HOA stared at the photo. Her expression shifted. Not instantly, not dramatically, but something flickered behind her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe realization, maybe the slow burn of a worldview cracking. A woman nearby started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the cafe filled with quiet, respectful applause. No one looked at HOA. They looked at the man who had just shared a piece of his past, and done so with more grace than anyone expected. Mr. Dalton didn't bow. He didn't smile. He simply tipped his cap, picked up his coffee, and walked back to his corner table. HOA stood frozen, her face pale. For the first time that morning, she didn't have anything to say. But it wasn't over yet. Before Mr. Dalton had spoken, HOA had been going on for a full minute, loud enough for half the cafe to hear. "Honestly," she'd said, rolling her eyes to a woman next to her in line, "these old guys wear those veteran hats just to get sympathy. Like we owe them something. It's 2025. Can we stop glorifying war already?" She scoffed, took a loud sip of her frappuccino, and added with a smirk, "What? Does he think wearing that hat makes him special? Please, it's just a free coffee card now." Couple people turned their heads. One man frowned. Another muttered something under his breath. But no one said anything directly, not until Mr. Dalton stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. His presence alone was enough to shift the air in the room. And then came the words, "Ma'am, I didn't fight so people could respect me. I fought so people like you had the right not to." That line landed like thunder in a quiet sky. And when he gently placed the photo of his fallen brothers in front of her, the smirk on HOA's face vanished. The whole room could feel it. That sudden stillness, the weight of history pressing down on a moment that, seconds ago, had seemed like just another petty scene in a coffee shop. And as the applause started and Mr. Dalton quietly returned to his seat, HOA stared at the photo. She didn't touch it, didn't say a word. But her fingers, which had been wrapped so confidently around her phone, began to tremble just slightly. She looked at the picture again. The boy in it, the one who would become Mr. Dalton, had kind eyes and dirt on his cheeks. The two boys beside him were laughing. One had scrawled something in Sharpie on his helmet. "Tell my mom I'm brave." That was when something cracked in HOA. She didn't cry, not yet, but whatever armor she'd built, of sarcasm, of disdain, of superiority, it began to splinter. And the story wasn't over. Because later that day she came back. And this time she wasn't carrying a drink. Later that evening, after the cafe had emptied out and the lights dimmed low, HOA found herself standing by the counter again. This time she wasn't on her phone, and she wasn't rushing to take orders. The shift had ended, but she hadn't left. She didn't know why exactly. Maybe it was the silence that had stayed with her all day, or the feeling of being unsettled. Maybe it was the way Mr. Dalton's calm words had echoed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The door jingled and she turned around. There he was, Mr. Dalton, standing at the counter with his coffee cup in hand. This time, though, his face was softer, no more sternness in his expression. He didn't seem angry anymore, and yet, there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel small. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. She hadn't expected him to come back. He hadn't said a word when he left earlier, just tipped his hat and left her standing there with her own thoughts. And then he spoke. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice still low, like gravel on a quiet road. "You think I'm just another old man holding on to the past. You think I'm here for pity. That's okay. I've heard it all before." HOA opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She had prepared a defense, something to keep herself in the safe zone of sarcasm and indifference, but it didn't come. Instead, she said, almost too softly to hear, "I'm sorry." Mr. Dalton's eyes softened, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't need to say anything back. The apology hung between them, raw and unspoken. For the first time, HOA truly looked at the old man. Not just the war veteran with a hat, but the man who had lived a life most of them would never understand. She looked at the photo again, the one he'd left on the table. There was something in his eyes back then, a mixture of youth and fear. A fear of never making it home, of never being able to do enough. HOA felt a lump rise in her throat. "I didn't mean to," she began, but the words didn't form properly. Mr. Dalton smiled gently. "You don't have to mean it. It's all right." The room was quiet. There was no applause, no drama this time. Just two people, one old, one young, standing in a space that felt suddenly much smaller, much more fragile than before. HOA inhaled deeply and took a step forward, moving slowly, as if testing the waters of something she hadn't felt in a long time. "I want to understand," she said, and for the first time in a while it wasn't an insult or a challenge or a joke. It was a genuine desire to know. "Tell me about them. The guys in the photo?" Mr. Dalton sat down at the counter, the quiet hum of the cafe making the space between them feel safe. He sipped his coffee, looked out the window for a moment, and then began to speak, his voice much softer now, as if he were telling a story only he and the men in that photo knew. A week had passed since the moment in the cafe. Hoa came in each morning, but something had shifted in her. She no longer carried the sharp edge she once had. Her usual demeanor, the smirking confidence, was replaced by a quiet introspection. The once jaded waitress who scoffed at veterans now found herself thinking about what Mr. Dalton had said. Everyone carries a burden. She still thought about him, but not with the same dismissive thoughts she once had. Every time she saw an elderly man in the diner, or even a soldier on the street, she felt a flicker of curiosity rather than judgment. And the strange part? It wasn't just because of Mr. Dalton's words. It was because she was beginning to realize her own burdens, the ones she had buried deep, the ones she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge. One day, as she was serving a table by the window, she noticed a man outside. He was older than most, dressed in a military jacket and hat. He wasn't a regular. She had never seen him before. And then, she noticed something that caught her breath. It was Mr. Dalton's hat. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should she say something? Should she approach him? After a pause, she made her decision. Hoa grabbed a cup of coffee, walked outside, and gently tapped the man's shoulder. He turned around, surprised to see her. "Mr. Dalton, right?" she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice held a warmth she hadn't expected. He smiled, recognizing her right away. "Well, if it isn't the one who thought I was just looking for attention." She laughed softly, the tension between them melting away. "I owe you a lot more than an apology." He chuckled and patted the seat beside him. "I'm just glad you're seeing the world a little differently now. It's not always about changing the world. Sometimes, it's just about changing yourself." Hoa sat down beside him and they talked for a long while. She learned that Mr. Dalton wasn't just a veteran. He was a man who had lost much, but still chose to give. He wasn't looking for sympathy, and he wasn't a hero. He was simply someone who had lived through the worst and had come out the other side still standing, still capable of kindness. As the conversation drifted into silence, Hoa realized that her life had shifted. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. The things she once took for granted, like the sacrifices others made, the stories hidden behind every face, suddenly mattered. Her journey of understanding had just begun. Before Mr. Dalton left, he gave her a piece of advice that stayed with her. "The hardest battles are the ones you fight in your heart. Don't be too quick to judge, Hoa. Sometimes, the greatest strength is knowing when to listen." Hoa nodded, watching as he disappeared into the distance. She stood there for a moment, the morning sun warming her face, feeling something different. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could look at the world with open eyes, free of judgment, and full of understanding. And as for Mr. Dalton, she knew she'd never forget the lesson he had taught her. Not in words, but in action. The quiet power of humility, the courage to stand tall in a world that forgets the cost of freedom, and the reminder that we all have burdens, but we don't have to carry them alone.